Hello and welcome to another standard gameplay video on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we're taking a look at a blue-black or Dimir Mill deck whose goal it is to let the opponent draw from an empty library so we can win the game. And the two key cards in our deck are Jace alongside Breach the Multiverse. And we typically want to play Jace for 4 mana in this deck as opposed to 3 mana and 2 life. That way it enters with the full 5 loyalty counters, and we can use the -X ability for X equals 5 right away to mill the opponent for 15. So if we mill the opponent for 15, Jace ends up in the graveyard, and later we can cast Breach the Multiverse for 7 mana, milling each player for 10 cards, and then for each player we can choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard and put those cards onto the battlefield under our control. So now we can potentially get back a Jace, and then a -X for 5 again, milling the opponent for 15, plus 10 more from Breach. So if you're keeping track, we've already milled the opponent for 45 just using 2 cards basically, and then we still get the card from the opponent's library, and in the meantime they may have drawn a few extra cards as well, so that gets us pretty close to already winning the game. And then of course we have additional flexibility here with Jace. We can shrink opposing creatures down with a +1, and we can use a -2 to draw extra cards, which becomes more effective if we've already milled the opponent for 20, because then we get to draw 3 cards as opposed to just 1. So there are quite a few options when it comes to the Perfected Mind. And I think this deck may be pretty well positioned in the post-bannings standard metagame, especially if the Atraxa domain decks pick up in popularity. Those decks are very good at dealing with creature strategies thanks to all the huge life gain threats, and they can also generate a ton of card advantage through Atraxa. But if the opponent spends a lot of time drawing extra cards with Atraxa, it kind of plays into our mill game plan, and they don't really have any hand disruption or counter spells to stop our Jace and Breach the Multiverse game plan. So that's what I'm counting on with this blue-black mill deck today. And then looking at the rest of our deck, we've got lots of cheap interaction to help us out against creature strategies, 4 copies of Cut Down, a very efficient removal spell, and then 2 copies of Rona's Vortex, which we can play for 1 mana, or we can play it kicked for 4 mana total, which gives us added flexibility of maybe dealing with enchantments to get some of our planeswalkers or creatures back if they're underneath binding or ossification. Then at 2 mana we have 4 copies of Founding the Third Path, which is a pretty flexible card as well. Can start from any of the 3 chapters. Usually want to start from chapter 1 if we have a removal spell we can cast for free with it. Otherwise we can start by maybe milling the opponent for 4, and eventually we can exile an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard, copy it, and cast the copy. So that lets us maybe replay a removal spell early on, but in a late game we could also get back a sweeper effect, or maybe even a Breach the Multiverse to help us end the game. Then we also have a couple counter spells with Make Disappear. Can also be nice to keep up alongside a Siphon Insight, which is now the new 2-mana card draw engine for blue-black strategies, replacing Reckoner Bankbuster. We get to look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down, and then we can play that card for as long as it remains exiled, so we can even play a lance from the opponent, and then we can also flash back Siphon Insight to get even more value later. Then we have some 2-mana removal as well with Go for the Throat to destroy a non-artifact creature, and Sheoldred's Edict can also be a nice answer to opposing planeswalkers. And then at 3 mana we've got the full set of the Celestus, which is a way to give us a bit more mana to ramp towards Breach the Multiverse, but it can also help us draw and discard, get rid of additional copies of the legendary Celestus, maybe get rid of removal spells against control strategies, and then we can also maybe still cast a 1-mana removal spell afterwards, which can be very mana efficient. And then there's Jace, and at 5 mana, 2 copies of Gix's Command as our sweeper of choice will typically destroy each creature with power 2 or less, and then each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. So we'll first destroy all the small stuff, and then hopefully get rid of the 1 remaining big threat. And then we also have 2 copies of Hidetsugu and Kairi, which has a lot of great synergy throughout the deck. A 5/4 legendary creature with flying. When it enters the battlefield, it essentially brainstorms, so we get to draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards from our hand on the top of our library in any order. Gives us a lot of interesting decisions. And then when Hidetsugu and Kairi dies, exile the top card of our library, and then target opponent loses life equal to its mana value. That we don't care about too much, but if it's an instant or sorcery card, we may cast it without paying its mana cost, which means if we can potentially put a Breach the Multiverse on top of our deck, and the opponent goes to take out Hidetsugu and Kairi, we can now cast it for free, not only getting back Hidetsugu potentially, but also a card from the opponent's library, and dealing 7 additional damage in the process, so that can quickly take over a game. Can also maybe put a Gix's Command on top, or just a removal spell that we can cast if our opponent takes out Hidetsugu and Kairi. And then there's also the combo of maybe sacrificing our own creature to make disappear with casualty. So there's a lot of neat interactions. Can also go for the throat our own creature just to enable it and cast a free Breach the Multiverse. And then the mana base is pretty straightforward, lots of blue-black duels, and then 2 copies of Blast Zone giving us added interaction. Can maybe blow up a bunch of 1-drops against the aggressive decks, and in the grindier matchups we can tick it up and eventually deal with a bunch of other permanents, maybe even enchantments, which blue-black can struggle with. And then Abandoned Mire, also a way of getting back Jace, and then Soaring City, an extra bounce effect. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. We've got our Jace, and then later Breach the Multiverse to maybe get it back from the graveyard. So all we're missing is some early interaction to stay alive. Let's see what our opponent's up to. Looks like maybe a multicolor domain deck. Okay, so we could cast Founding, just starting to maybe mill the opponent for 4, since there's no free spell to cast. Or we could wait to maybe get back Breach the Multiverse later in the game, since this is probably going to be a grindy matchup, and if we don't have any spell to get back right away, it's kind of wasted if we're just milling for 4. So we'll play Celestus. Did not seem like they had a Leyline Binding they could play, although they're missing blue mana, so now they can cast it for 1 mana. And now we can discard something like Cut Down, which is not going to have any great targets in the matchup. Happy to play Jace, and we can just mill for 15 here since we have another one.
Emotions are distractions. Focus on the facts. In time.
And our opponent is indeed on a 5-color domain deck with Atraxa. So yeah, for opponents planning to draw a ton of cards, that sort of plays into our mill game plan. So if we can get to 7 for Breach the Multiverse, I'll be happy. Invasion helps their opponent ramp, so next turn they could cast a 7-drop already. Although, also funny to notice, if we mill enough of their basic lands, they may not have enough to search up, but our opponent's still getting Plains and Swamp. Okay, land is good. So play Jace. Opponent's got 15 cards in graveyard, so we could play Jace and then maybe go for like a -3. So we set up the -2 to draw 3 cards on the following turn, forcing the opponent to answer it, although they could do so in a multitude of ways. There's not only Leyline Binding, but they could also Ossification it, they could also take it out with an Archangel of Wrath, so I'm unlikely to untap with Jace, so at that point it's maybe better to just mill for 15 once again. So let's try that.
Surrender your mind to Phyrexia's will. Your victory, nothing.
And then we can Founding. Opponent's got 17 cards left, so sure, we'll start from chapter 2, mill them for 4. Could also mill ourselves to maybe get access to an instant or sorcery that we wouldn't otherwise have. But we get to switch it back to daytime, draw and discard, and dig towards our 7th mana source. I'll take a Hidetsugu as well. Even though I'm sure there will be targets for Go for the Throat, can always get it back with the final chapter of Founding. So is it time for Atraxa, or maybe an Etali? It's gonna be Etali. One's got 12 cards left. They found Sheoldred's Edict, which doesn't do anything, and a Leyline Binding, which can get rid of Celestus here, more likely than our Founding. Although they may want to get rid of Founding, so we cannot take out Etali, who knows. But nope, Celestus down. Okay, so in that case, probably want to deal with Etali here while we can, and I think we'll go for the Edict. Keep Go for the Throat in graveyard for maybe a later use. So sacrifice a non-token creature. And then if we draw land next turn we can Breach, and that would be game over, getting back Jace. And just milling the opponent for 10 would do it too, so don't even need Jace. So don't hate my spot. It's gonna be an Archangel, doesn't apply a ton of pressure here. Can transform their battle. But yeah, this is probably one of our better matchups. A slow deck that's trying to ramp, cast some big expensive spells that involve drawing a lot of cards and searching lands is not going to want to face a ton of mill effects. So now we can play Hidetsugu and just look for an extra land. And then Breach should do the rest. Opponent shouldn't be playing any counter spells that I'm aware of. And I guess we can keep a Breach on top just in case they take out Hidetsugu. So Breach and Shipwreck Marsh can go to the top. And then we can still have access to Go for the Throat. Opponent might have another Leyline Binding here end of turn, but they decide against it. And actually I could go for the Throat my own Hidetsugu, could have done it in my turn as well, but we'll maybe wait for something like an Ossification to show up. And then we'll try it, and if they Leyline Binding in response to exile it so we don't trigger it, then so be it. And yep, there it is. So had we gone for Go for the Throat end of our turn, I think our opponent had the Leyline Binding in hand already. So they're not dead yet, but another turn here will do it. Topiary Stomper, that's fine. Now there is of course a danger in putting an expensive card on top if our opponent had another Etali, but with double Breach we should have been safe. And then it shouldn't matter too much what we get here, but we can choose between Etali and Atraxa, and our opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, our hand seems fine. Early removal with Cut Down, can counter with Make Disappear. Do need to pick up an extra island to play Jace for its full amount, but can always play it for 3 if necessary. Happy to take out Skrelv here. So our opponent could be on Esper Legends, could be on Blue-White Soldiers, sometimes plays Skrelv, but nope. Looks like Esper Legends. Happy to counter Thalia, since that card's pretty annoying to deal with otherwise. So can Founding, and then just mill for 4. And then if our opponent plays something we can cut down, we can get that back. If not, we'll play Jace next turn. Adeline in the graveyard. And Arona I'm happy to cut down before Skrelv can protect it. And Celestus will still be able to play, so that works out beautifully. Blast Zone also an answer to Skrelv, but probably need the land to get up to 7 mana for Breach. Danik could be an issue when it comes to Founding, getting back spells from our graveyard, since cards in graveyards can be the targets of spells or abilities. Can go for Jace now. If we mill the opponent, there's also the risk of milling Danik, which the opponent can disturb. But I think milling for 15 is the way to go. Could also let it switch to Knight, so we get to draw and discard. And get towards 7 mana for Breach. But I kind of want Jace in the graveyard for Breach anyway.
In time, all will witness fire. Nothing could be more vulnerable
Okay.
than your memory.
Our opponent likely has access to Abandoned Mire, which is also a way of getting legendaries back from the graveyard. But it would also mill them for a few cards. Get to untap. Our opponent could be hanging on to an Ertai Resurrected, which is a great way to counter a 7 mana Breach the Multiverse. So we'll have to watch out for that. For now, happy to pass it back, keep up, kick to Runa's Vortex and Make Disappear. Thalia, okay. That one I wouldn't be able to make disappear. If I bounce, I'll need to bounce Skrelv. So maybe the best solution is just take a Blast Zone to 2, dealing with both Thalia and Danik. Although I really want to avoid losing my land here, so it's a tough spot. Take our draw step. The land is good. But of course now Breach is 8 mana because of Thalia, so yeah, I think we'll have to pull the trigger here. And then, do we activate now to play around Plaza? That may be worth it. And then we'll still have Make Disappear available. Opponent's got another Thalia, of course. So that will need to be dealt with. And a backup Danik as well. So we did not accomplish much. Could not counter Danik because of the Thalia attacks. And Skrelv stays back. So won't be able to bounce Thalia here anytime soon. Okay, let's just take our draw step then. Maybe look for a Cruelty of Gix to wipe the board. Make Disappear, I think, has ran its course. Although it could still counter an impactful 4-drop. Vortex might be more awkward with Skrelv in play. Thalia is also extra annoying with Breach, because if we go to cast a spell for free, we might still have to pay the extra tax if it's a non-creature spell. So definitely need to deal with Thalia. Hidetsugu is a good one. So now maybe okay discarding Island, keep a Make Disappear for the turn, and then try and resolve Hidetsugu. Although we're back to Ertai Resurrected being an issue. So I'm hoping our opponent taps out for something. Nope, opponent passes. Yeah, so if we go for Hidetsugu, opponent casts Ertai, counters it, we get to draw. And then we're taking 7 down to 8. Yeah, that might still be the play. What's the alternative? Don't really have a great one. Bounce Skrelv, and then keep a Make Disappear, but it's not like I can counter Skrelv on the way down. And we're pretty far from Hidetsugu with Make Disappear backup. Our opponent could also be keeping up a channel land like Soaring City to bounce our creature, but our best chance is probably to find a Gix's command to wipe the opponent's board. And speak of the devil, right off the top after opponent casts Go for the Throat, and we can still cast Gix's command for free after paying Thalia stacks for 1 mana, and that's enough to prompt a concession. Yeah, that escalated very quickly. Hidetsugu once again saves the day. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Hand seems fine. 2 removal spells into a Jace. May played on turn 3 already. And now a Rona's Vortex, which we can also cast early. Opponent's red-white with a farmhand. Points towards a more mid-range deck typically. No need to Vortex farmhands. Maybe we'll go for the Throat their next play. Although if it's a wedding announcement, that could be annoying since their opponent's going wide with a bunch of tokens. Instead a Guardian of Girapur, they can flicker farmhand, get an extra plains. Could kill the response, or we could take out the Guardian of Girapur. Now I might be okay taking out farmhand to deny that 1 extra land. And then I could already play Jace, but I think I prefer playing it with extra loyalty. So we'll just pass with our removal at the ready. And then probably fine to take 3, see what's next. Prefer playing this kicked if possible. Companion to draw, that's acceptable. So our opponent might be playing the 5 mana enchantment that flickers their creatures end of turn, giving them haste in the process as well. See a lot of enter the battlefield synergy. Okay, so I can play Jace. And I've got a few options. Could -2 to get an extra card out of the deal. Could mill for 15 right away. Next turn, keep up some more removal and then hope to get to 7 mana for Breach, which could also work out. Yeah, let's just mill for 15 here. Especially for opponents holding some removal like Ossification that could deal with Jace if we try and keep it around. So yeah, opponent is going big. See cards like Invoke Justice to get stuff back from the graveyard, Itali. So Invoke Justice could be scary, although luckily our opponent's got a mountain in there, so that might make it trickier to cast Invoke on curve. Invasion to discard and draw. Opponent discards a Pyre. which could also damage planeswalkers for what it's worth. Finding a land is nice, so we get to pass, keep up Rona's Vortex with Kicker. Can maybe go for the throat. And the 1 damage from Companion is fine. Even though now they could maybe deal 3 to the battle to transform it. Opponent is looking at the graveyard, so they might be able to get back an Etali here. Yeah, that's too bad. Can take out Etali, but not before they get some free value. And then there's the +1 counters from Invoke Justice as well. Opponent puts all counters on Companion, which makes sense. Spreading out the wealth. And they found Celestus on our side and the Elder Dragon War, which could also just make a 4/4. So we're in trouble. Now we can potentially bounce the dragon to take care of it. Could also use Soaring City as a bounce spell, which would be maybe the best solution for the dragon, but I also want to keep hitting my land drops for Breach, which is the only realistic win condition here. So end of turn, maybe we do go for the throat Etali, and then just bounce the dragon token, as opposed to dealing with Companion. Opponent will get to transform Invasion of Mercadia. Yeah, this is tough. Maybe we can just take our draw step. We hit a land, so this is interesting now. We could pass and then both channel Soaring City and cast a 1-mana Vortex, but then we're not guaranteed an extra land for Breach. But we can maybe wait and see which creature they send at the invasion and act accordingly. Because yeah, Breach would mill the opponent for 25 essentially. So that could be lethal if we can pull it off. So I may not need to use Soaring City here. Although that is 13 damage before seeing what Etali brings to the table. Cut down doesn't do anything. Wandering Emperor is an extra +1 counter. So it's not quite lethal. Opponent's got 25 cards, so yeah, if we cast Breach, mill for 10, Jace mill for 15, opponent untaps with an empty library. So yeah, as long as we hang on to Soaring City, we should be fine. Let's Vortex. And take some damage. Could have also played a kicked Vortex on Companion, doesn't really matter. And Emperor makes a 2/2. Celestus triggers, opponent drawing an extra card, only helps our cause. And cast Breach. Get back Jace. And from the opponent's graveyard, we can choose here. How about a nice Etali? Get a Pyre. Deal 3. Can clean up the Wandering Emperor. But just need Jace. And that should do it. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. Some early removal with double cut down and make disappear to counter an impactful spell. A good blast zone to maybe deal with some other cheap threats. And then work our way up towards Breach the Multiverse to hopefully take over. We'll have to wait and see what our opponent's up to. If they're a control strategy, then double cut down's not going to be incredibly helpful. So hopefully we see a couple early creatures. Okay, Proving Ground points towards maybe a multicolor deck. So not exactly what we were hoping for. I'll hang on to Make Disappear. It is going to be an underdog early. That one we can cut down. And then I still want to hang on to Make Disappear, even though Fable of the Mirrorbreaker is no longer a concern for a 3-drop that needs countering. Still probably safer to do so. And if we don't need to counter anything, we can still take a Blast Zone at least. Picked up Hidetsugu, which is a nice combo with the Breach. Can also potentially sacrifice her own creature to casualty to set up a free Breach the Multiverse. Opponent's got a fetch land here. Okay. So at most we can see another 2-drop. And it's going to be a Bushwhack to find a land. So Bushwhack potentially points on the opponent playing with Phyrexian Obliterator alongside fight effects, which could be quite scary if we have our opponent fight Hidetsugu. That could make us sacrifice all our lands pretty much. So my only answer to Obliterator right now is Make Disappear. So I don't think I want to tap out for Celestus. But that does mean not really progressing our mana, which is problematic. But yeah, kind of between a rock and a hard place. Now our opponent, instead of committing Obliterator, they can just blitz Underdog, keep drawing. So I really need to hit those line drops. No point in using Cut Down. Opponent gets to draw regardless from blitz. Would just save us 3 damage, but we'll probably have better uses for Cut Down. We can at least level a Blast Zone, which will eventually get up to 4 counters to deal with Obliterator. Alright, so now we can play Celestus, keep up Make Disappear. And if our opponent just wants to blitz Underdog over and over, that's fine by me. It's going to be a Glissa for now. That one dodges Make Disappear. So yeah, that happens. Also cannot cut it down. Can use Blast Zone, but then we also lose Celestus, so that's not ideal. So probably have to wait another turn to play Hidetsugu until we also keep up Make Disappear as insurance. And that way if we sack Hidetsugu, there's nothing for the opponent to fight. So could play Founding, even though Glissa can also take it out. Could just pass, let it switch to Knight and loot with Celestus. And maybe discard Cut Down. Okay, Ronel's Vortex is a better answer to Glissa. So before it hits us, we'll probably kick Vortex and then we'll still have Make Disappear available. Although now our opponent's at the point where they can pay for Make Disappear and still resolve Obliterator. So yeah, opponent could still get an Obliterator in play here, but I don't think we want Glissa drawing extra cards each turn, so it has to be dealt with. And there can be a Graveyard Trespasser for now instead. It is nighttime, so exiles 2 cards. Can counter with Make Disappear, so could be annoying when it comes to our final chapter of Founding, not getting anything back from the graveyard now. Take our turn. Okay, I think we go for Hidetsugu. Hope there's no instant speed removal. Then we can hit our land drop and play Make Disappear. Alternative is Jace, mill for 15, 30 left. Then Breach for another Jace. Wouldn't quite be lethal yet. Kind of prefer Hidetsugu here, even though Go for the Throat could kill it at instant speed before we can set up our library. Alright, so Breach on top seems like the move. Question is, first card on top or second card on top? And yeah, let's go with first card on top, and then second card can be a Celestus, which I can maybe mill with Founding so we don't need to draw it. And then now I can Make Disappear with Casualty if our opponent puts anything on the stack. Right, Go for Throat. I don't need to Make Disappear, we'll just let it happen. Cast our free Breach. So they probably would have been better off casting Go for the Throat in response to the Brainstorm trigger. Now we get to Breach for free. And yeah, there's Obliterator. And we of course get Hidetsugu back as well. So yeah, I think Obliterator over Shieldred's or Glissa makes sense. And then we get the Brainstorm again. And then now we can keep up Go for the Throat, and the opponent has seen enough. That's how quickly Hidetsugu can take over with Breach the Multiverse. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the play with a fine hand, assuming Siphon Insight can hit a few line drops. Got some cheap removal, and then double Hidetsugu as well. So we'll keep up Cut Down. And then turn 2 we can Insight. Opponent blue-white could be Control if they're playing Deserted Beach, typically not played in the more aggressive decks. So Siphon Insight's a good card in the matchup. Cut Down not so much. But I'm sure our opponent also has a few dead cards. Wedding Announcement, probably the best one here. And could already cast it, could play Celestus first. But let's put the opponent to the test. Do they have a counter spell? They don't. So if they're playing Wedding Announcement, it could be a more mid-range deck as opposed to pure control. So we may still have a few targets for cut down. And I do want to keep hitting my land drops. Doing it with Celestus seems good enough. And then we can still maybe cut down an opposing token. For mana, we're in Wandering Emperor territory. And yeah, there it is, main phase. To maybe play around a counterspell. But cut down the perfect answer to the Samurai. Could also bounce with Vortex, but we'll keep the flexibility of Kicker. And then now we can finish off Emperor. Draw a card from Wedding Announcements. And we're in the driver's seat. So could play Jace to start milling. Could Siphon Insight to hit our land drop for the turn, which I also don't mind. If I pass, we let it switch to Knight. We also get to draw and discard, which maybe finds us a land. And then if we find one with Siphon, I'll still be able to play Hidetsugu next turn. So maybe try that instead. Not in a hurry to play Jace. Still no land. We'll discard. Maybe one Rona's Vortex can go. And a Sunset Revelry. So we have an Underground River. Can tap that for mana, so our opponent doesn't gain any life. Not gonna kill my own creatures. Opponent's got 5 cards in hand, we have 6. So we could deny the card draw by just casting Cut Down, but doesn't seem necessary. So we'll probably end up casting Siphon Insight. And I'll take the land over Wedding Announcements. So I can play Hidetsugu now. If it gets countered, we have a backup, so that's alright. And what do we put on top? Maybe another Siphon Insight in case our opponent casts a board wipe. Could also be something like a Farewell, exiling everything, and then Hidetsugu doesn't trigger. But we'll go with the Siphon Insight on top, followed by probably just a land. And might as well attack. So yeah, Farewell would be pretty rough. Could be a reason to get Jace on the board here, so we at least have a Planeswalker that survives, as opposed to just milling for 15. Ossification exiles Hidetsugu instead. Can still maybe Rona's Vortex to get it back, which is pretty good value when we get ETB effect once again. And another Revelry. So far opponent's not really threatening us too much. We've got time to set up our Breach the Multiverse. Discard a land here. And then could play Jace and still cast a Siphon Insight. Could play Hidetsugu, although it won't be with necessarily 2 mana backup. So probably prefer Jace now. And just mill for 15. Next turn we can do it once again. And the token can stay back to play defense. Alright, so opponent is definitely more control than I suspected. See Farewell, multiple sweepers, Union to draw. So they could still have some counter spells in hand that we haven't seen in action. Going for Vortex at the end of the opponent's turn is probably the best way to get value from Hidetsugu. To Ferry, if that happens.
Running from battles,
It's gonna draw.
There is much the past can teach us.
Vortex also an answer to Teferi. So yeah, after seeing the Wedding Announcement, thought Cut Down would be more useful, but in hindsight, Runa's Vortex might have been the better card. Farewell, I don't think is a card we want, but Depopulate could maybe get us out of a hairy situation. Also draws if we take out our own Hidatsugu, and that's also a way of triggering it to maybe set up a Breach in the Multiverse. So that could be a powerful setup, although just casting a Breach here would potentially win us the game if it resolves, since we get back Jace, which also mills for another 15. So opponent does not have a counter. And we'll get Teferi from the opponents, and a Jace from us. Mill for 15, and yeah, Jace is pretty effective against these control decks that don't really apply a ton of pressure. Gives you ample time to set up, and there we have it. So yeah, overall this blue-black mill deck seems pretty well positioned against some more controlling and some mid-range decks in the new standard format. Haven't faced a whole lot of aggro decks, but Mono Red could definitely be a tough matchup, a deck that gets on the board quickly and that can maybe close out the game with a few burn spells, may be able to take us out before we set up the lethal mill effect. But even a deck like Esper Legends we were able to beat with some early interaction, and then of course Gix's command came at the right time. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.